few years ago, the Wall Street Journal ran a cartoon with a preacher standing in the pulpit on a Sunday morning, holding a piece of paper and saying this: "I take as my text for this morning line 40 from Form 1040, dealing with taxable contributions, itemized deductions, charitable contributions." And that's the way a lot of people think about stewardship. It's not all bad to think about stewardship that way. After all, what would happen to churches or hospitals or universities or nonprofits of any kind, as soup kitchens, if we didn't have line 40 in Form 1040? Even preachers think about tax deductions at stewardship time. Perhaps it's not just blatant greed. Perhaps it's not just trying to keep from giving the government so much of our money. Perhaps there is actually some altruism in some charitable contributions, and it's not a bad place to start. You have to start somewhere when you are giving to the church. And so this morning, what I want to do is I want to do some straight talk about Christian giving. Now, if you're a visitor today and this is the first Sunday you actually came, you've come on a Stewardship Sunday. We only do this about once a year, so come back another time if you don't want to hear stewardship as a visitor. I want to talk to you about giving in the Christian faith with 3 points. First, the promise. Second, the practice. And third, the person. First of all, the promise. Now, on November 8th, which we will call Dedication Sunday, when we will dedicate our gifts, and you will have sent in your pledge cards, or maybe you will bring them that day, we will be pledging our promise to God. You will not be making a pledge to Bobby Epting, who's the Minister of Stewardship, or to Denise Moore, who is the CFO and the Executive Director of the Foundation, or the Chair of the Finance Committee, or me, or IPC. You are making a pledge to God. So many people think about stewardship as only fundraising, when in reality, it's about your relationship, your individual relationship to Jesus Christ. That's what stewardship is. And so you and I have a responsibility to remember that we are making a pledge to God. In many ways, what we're doing is making a deal with God. That's what we're doing. And yet there's nothing really Christian about that, because we make deals all the time, don't we? We make deals in our jobs, in our businesses, in our schools, in our families. I mean, it's not even Judeo-Christian tradition to make a deal with God. And Muslims in the Middle East make deals. I mean, Japanese Buddhists make deals. Atheistic and agnostic Americans make deals. We make deals all the time. We can make deals with God. I told the session and the diaconate the other night about a Korean businessman who was very successful, and yet he wanted to be even more successful, so he made a deal with God in the 1970s. God, if you'll help me be successful in my business, I will bring 10,000 people to Christ. Now, no American ever talks this way. Only Koreans actually talk this way. And in the early 1990s, he was very successful. And he remembered the deal he made with God. And he looked around Korea and he said, well, everybody's a Presbyterian here. There's nobody to convert. So I think I'll go to Russia. He goes to Russia. He buys a factory. And he turns it into a seminary. He brings over Korean professors who train indigenous Russian professors. And when I went to lecture there at the Moscow Presbyterian Theological Seminary a few years ago, there were 100 students from all over the former Soviet Union, and they were Pentecostal Presbyterians. I still have a hard time putting those words together. Their hands were in the air, they were excited in the prayers, and when we sang, and those of us from the United States couldn't get our hands any higher than this. But Elder Lee made this deal with God, and he figured out that if he bankrolled all the churches of all these 100 students, and each one brought in 100, he will have brought his 10,000 people to Christ. We make deals like this. Not always in the United States like that. We make deals when we get married. This is a handshake deal when we say our vows to our spouse before God and these witnesses. We make deals with our children, with certain rewards for certain behavior. In our business world, it's harder to make handshake deals anymore. How many handshake deals have you made lately? And we got to sign a contract to cover ourselves legally. I once knew a person who was so honest that people could shake his hands and they knew they could take it to the bank. He was in my congregation in Dallas, and he had grown up here in Cuba, Alabama, which he called Cuber. And he was a very successful commercial real estate businessman, and he was known all over the city as someone that you could shake hands with and you knew you could take it to the bank. Gil Thomas, amazing person. How many people do you know like that? We break deals all the time. We break our promises to each other. We sometimes even break them to ourselves. We say, well, we're going to follow these New Year's resolutions, and then we break them. But breaking a promise to God, now that's a very serious matter. And Ecclesiastes talks about that in the passage that Lucy read just a few moments ago. Do not break your vows. Don't even make a vow to God if you're going to break it. Because you never know what God is going to do with your promises. God will do more than you ever expected. Look at the things that have happened with this church across the last 100 years. It's absolutely amazing. God will do more than you expect with your promises. And sometimes then God expects you to follow through when you make a promise. Well, it's kind of the end of the baseball season. We're getting into playoffs, and you know I'm a kind of a Pittsburgh Pirates fan. And if you ever lived in Pittsburgh back in the day, you will know there was a sportscaster, a baseball broadcaster named Bob Prince, who was famous all over Western Pennsylvania. He was on KDKA radio, and he had all these funny little sayings. An easy fly ball was a can of corn. That's just a can of corn. Or a fly ball straight up and down over the pitcher's mound was, that's a home run in an elevator shaft. Oh, yeah, that's, But every time Willie Stargell came to bat, Bob Prince would start in on the radio. Come on, Willie, spread a little chicken on the hill, Willie, spread a little chicken on the hill. And I finally asked, what's that about? Well, they said Willie Stargell has a chicken place, a chicken restaurant in the Hill District, which is a sort of poorer section. It's actually the area after which the show Hill Street Blues was modeled. And he had this fried chicken restaurant up there, and anytime anybody was in that restaurant, when he hit a home run, they got free fried chicken. Come on, Willie, he said, spread a little chicken on the hill, Willie. Spread a little chicken on the hill. Well, one night they were playing the Houston Astros, and they were behind 2-1. It was the bottom of the ninth, 2 outs, one guy on. Stargell comes back. Bob Prince starts in. Come on, Willie, spread a little chicken on the hill, Willie. Spread a little chicken on the hill. And he foul tips a bunch of balls off. It's full count, 3-2. He keeps foul tip. Come on, Willie. And finally, Bob Prince says, Willie, on the radio all over the kind of western Pennsylvania and Ohio, Willie, if you'll just hit a home run right now, I'll buy free fried chicken for everybody who comes into your place between now and midnight. Bam, that goes right over the right field fence. And that night, Bob Prince spread a lot of chicken on the hill. Be careful what you promise, because you may have to follow through. That's the first stage of Christian giving. It's the promise stage. It's kind of like making a deal. It's like making a deal with God. The second stage is the practice stage, and some of the other passages that I read are closer to that. The Matthew 6 passage about laying up treasures in heaven in a kind of, theological IRA where neither moth nor rust consume, or thieves don't break in and steal. I mean, that's the kind of treasure you want to have. And what's interesting about this is kind of the Jewish approach. This is an approach to giving of moral responsibility and duty. It's almost a legalistic approach. In fact, I could preach that Matthew 6:19-21 passage that I just read. I could preach it at a Friday night Shabbat service at Temple Emmanuel or Temple Bethel and not miss a beat. Jews understand that there is a responsibility to give. There is a responsibility to participate. Even if a wealthy Jew is only giving, 2 or 3% of his or her income, or maybe the rich young ruler who is tithing and giving 10%, they all understood that this is a responsibility that we have because we love God. Now, one of the ideas that we are presenting this year in the stewardship campaign, and I'll be presenting it every year that I am here, is that if you're not giving, go ahead and give at least 1% of your income. Just start somewhere. I'm not going to push everybody to tithing. That just makes you feel guilty, and it just sort of pushes you off. You know, if you're not, unless you have a miracle happen in your life, you're not going to jump to tithing, but 1%. If you're not giving at all. And if you are and you're not at tithing, then let's everybody step up by 1%. That's just a practice that we need to begin to have at IPC. And when we do, the budget will just grow and we will have plenty of money to do whatever it is God wants us to do. Some of us start as children doing that. Jane and I started as children tithing, and that's all we've ever done our whole lives. And I've actually asked the children's directors and the youth directors to start talking to the children and the young people about, don't just ride along on your parents' streams there. Just come along and give as well yourself. And that's important. Lucy Turner was telling us in staff meeting the other day about a little boy that was in a church where she was serving, and he was getting a 10 cents allowance every week, 10 cents, and he gave a nickel to the church, and he kept a nickel for himself. Now that's really generous. That's like 50% of giving. Wow. And then one morning, she said he was walking through the church parking lot, and he walked over this grate and dropped one of his nickels, and it went down the grate. And he looked down, and he said, "Well, there goes God's nickel." You see, so he had his priorities, Giving as a duty is not bad in itself because it's a place to start, but it only gets you so far, right? I mean, we start with a promise. It's a deal we make with God. Then we move as we grow in our Christian giving to a practice. But finally, there is a person. And it is the person of Jesus Christ. Oh, and it's you as a person trying to figure out how to follow Jesus Christ. Now, this takes us to a deeper, richer way of Christian giving because we see it in its highest form in Christ, who gave himself completely. Greater love hath no one than this, than one laid down one's life for one's friends. This takes us beyond the marketplace of bargains and deals and promises. It takes us beyond the place of practice, of legalistic approach, of moral duty and responsibility. It takes us to the foot of the cross, where one then begins giving with no strings attached, no hope for some reward in return, because we know that we have already received the greatest gift of all in Jesus Christ. Hear this great truth. The person who has lost the most is the one who has the most to give. When I was a young seminary student in Louisville, Kentucky, in the fall of 1970, so 45 years ago, I remember when I wasn't working in a church, I was a chaplain in a hospital, so I didn't have to go to a certain church every Sunday. I remember going almost every Sunday to Crescent Hill Baptist Church to hear a young pastor there named John Claypool, probably one of the great preachers of the 20th century. And here I was, just this young seminary student, never imagining that years later he would become the rector of St. Luke's Episcopal Church right here in Birmingham, and that I would come here to IPC in the providence of God. Those of you who know John Claypool or knew him know that he lost a daughter, Laura Lou, to leukemia, and it changed his life. Wrote an incredible book called Tracts of a Fellow Struggler. It deepened his faith in God. When we think about those who have lost loved ones, and that touches all of us, think for a moment about those who have lost children. That's the greatest loss of all. We never imagined that our children will precede us in death. It happened to William Sloane Coffin, chaplain at Yale, who later became pastor at Riverside Church in New York City, when he said one day, a week ago last Monday, my 24-year-old son Alexander, during a terrible storm, who always liked to beat his old man in every race and every game, beat his father to the grave. Among the healing flood of letters that followed his death was this one with this wonderful quotation from Hemingway's Farewell to Arms. The world breaks everyone, then some become strong at the broken places. Hear this great truth. The ones who have lost the most have the most to give. And from the annals of World War II, D.T. Niles tells the story of the Reverend Matthew Sands, who one day received a telegram announcing that his son had been killed in action. Distraught, he kneels to pray, but prayer doesn't seem to work for him, and he turns the telegram over and scribbles across the back, "All that I have, all that I am, I give to God for his service." A university contacts him about a teaching position, and he's on his way to an interview for the position, and he sees a church, an abandoned church, with a sign out front that says "For sale by auction," and he goes inside and he kneels and he prays and he decides that he's going to make a bid, make a proposal on this church so it can be preserved for a house of God. And he finds out there's a very wealthy businessman who's also making a bid, and he knows there's no way that he could beat him, but he just decides he's going to do it. He goes home, he prays about it, he adds up all that he owns, he adds up everything, and he makes a bid, he writes a letter of proposal and gets ready to mail it. And on the day that the announcement is to be made, he's sitting out in the pew and he sticks his hand in his pocket and he realizes that he didn't even put the letter of proposal in the envelope, but by mistake he put the telegram. And when the trustee stands up, he says, "The winning bid goes to the Reverend Matthew Sands, for his bid is higher than anyone else's. All that I have and all that I am, I give to God for his service." The ones who have lost the most have the most to give. On November 8th, we're going to dedicate our pledges, and we're going to rededicate our lives to God. You do want to be a part of that, don't you? All that I have and all that I am, I give to God for his service. God bless you all.